In recent months, the international political landscape has been gripped by escalating tensions, especially as the United States imposes sanctions on 19 Indian entities accused of exporting dual-use items to Russia. These measures mark a significant development in an era where Western powers, particularly the United States, face unprecedented challenges in maintaining their global influence. The sanctions reflect broader, complex geopolitical strategies, while simultaneously showcasing India's increasing self-assurance on the world stage. Indian companies have responded with calm resilience, demonstrating adaptability and signaling a shift in global dynamics toward alternative economic alliances. This essay will explore the ramifications of these sanctions within the context of an evolving multipolar world, analyze how Indian companies continue to thrive despite economic restrictions, and examine the larger implications for global trade dynamics as BRICS nations strengthen their economic influence and the Western Bloc faces growing competition. Through a comprehensive examination, this narrative highlights the potential for a paradigm shift where emerging powers begin to define the future of global trade, challenging the hegemony of traditional Western powerhouses. Setting the scene. The context behind United States sanctions on India. The United States has imposed sanctions on 19 Indian companies, accusing them of facilitating the export of dual-use items, which are goods that have both civilian and military applications, to Russia. Dual-use items, particularly sensitive in this era of geopolitical strain, include technologies, equipment, and materials that could potentially aid in Russia's military capabilities. Such items fall under intense scrutiny due to their versatility and implications for national security. This situation arises amidst a backdrop of escalating Western attempts to isolate Russia economically. However, it is also a clear indication of the United States' vigilance toward any entities, whether from allies or neutrals, that might undermine the sanctions designed to weaken Russia. India, which maintains long-standing strategic and trade relations with Russia, finds itself at the crossroads of its growing alliance with both BRICS nations and the West. The current sanctions, therefore, bring several complex and critical issues into the spotlight. Geopolitical repercussions. India's balancing act between Russia and the West showcases its diplomatic agility, but also puts pressure on its commercial entities. Trade and compliance complexities. Navigating United States-imposed sanctions while adhering to domestic policies reflects the adaptability of Indian companies within restrictive trade environments. Economic sovereignty. The emphasis on conducting transactions in Indian rupees rather than United States dollars hints at a shift away from dependence on American financial systems. India's silent but strategic response. While United States sanctions have sparked considerable debate globally, the Indian government has remained notably silent. This silence is not indicative of inaction or indifference, but rather points to a carefully calculated diplomatic approach. By refraining from a public response, India avoids escalating the situation, maintaining a delicate balance between its strategic relationship with the United States and its historical alliance with Russia. India's neutral stance may also reflect an understanding of its growing clout in the international arena. As one of the core members of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, India has seen an increase in its influence in the global south. This geopolitical alliance stands in contrast to the Western Bloc, representing an alternative to the economic and political dominance of the West. India's muted response could be interpreted as a strategic choice that conveys confidence and self-reliance without triggering unnecessary friction with its Western allies. Key points of India's response: diplomatic prudence. Silence allows India to maintain its diplomatic autonomy without publicly aligning or opposing the West. Focus on economic stability. By not engaging publicly, India minimizes disruption in its commercial relationships with the United States. Symbol of emerging self-assertion. India's quiet approach signals its capacity to navigate complex geopolitical waters without external intervention. Indian companies response resilience and pragmatism. In the face of these sanctions, Indian companies have demonstrated remarkable resilience, emphasizing their ability to continue business operations despite the sanctions. A core component of this resilience is a shift towards payments in Indian rupees, thereby circumventing reliance on United States dollars, which are traditionally used in international transactions. This adaptation not only showcases resourcefulness, but is also a strategic move toward greater financial independence. Transitioning to Indian rupee payments. The adoption of Indian rupee payments underscores a significant departure from dollar-dominated transactions. For decades, the United States dollar has been the world's primary reserve currency, granting the United States substantial influence over international financial markets. However, Indian firms' decision to adopt alternative payment mechanisms reflects a broader trend among BRICS nations to create parallel financial systems, reducing susceptibility to United States economic pressures. This shift is emblematic of India's move toward economic sovereignty, resonating with the larger BRICS agenda of reducing Western financial dominance. For Indian companies, conducting transactions in rupees is more than a practical adjustment. It is a step toward reshaping the international economic landscape. Company confidence and resilience. Many sanctioned companies have stated that the restrictions have had minimal impact on their operations, citing their diversified markets and alternative trading strategies. This response points to a deeper trend of resilience within India's corporate sector, which has grown accustomed to navigating turbulent geopolitical waters. Indian businesses' strategies include diversified trade networks. By cultivating relationships with multiple global partners, Indian companies reduce their dependency on Western markets. Emphasis on non-dollar transactions. The prioritization of rupee-based transactions mitigates the effect of United States sanctions and fosters economic self-reliance. Reframing sanctions as opportunities. Rather than viewing sanctions as a hindrance, many Indian companies see them as an opportunity to strengthen indigenous production and foster regional partnerships. This reaction exemplifies a growing mindset within India's corporate ecosystem, one that views sanctions not as insurmountable obstacles, but as catalysts for innovation and resilience. Adding another layer to this complex situation, Japan recently imposed similar sanctions on an Indian company for its alleged involvement with Russia. Japan's actions align with a broader trend among Western allies, signaling an international coalition aimed at limiting Russia's access to military-capable technologies. Although Japan's influence in global sanctions enforcement differs from that of the United States, its involvement underlines a shared stance among US-aligned nations regarding Russia's military engagements. Japan's involvement marks a significant step, as it aligns Asia's third-largest economy with Western policies targeting entities that aid Russia. This alignment is crucial, as it highlights the global security concerns that underlie these sanctions. However, Japan's decision also underscores the pressure on Asian nations to follow the Western narrative on Russia, despite varying regional interests. Japan's sanctions indicate its close alignment with US policy goals, especially regarding global security and dual-use technology concerns. Japan's stance pressures other neutral Asian countries to clarify their positions on Russia, possibly complicating their trade dynamics. The alignment of US and Japanese sanctions demonstrates a cohesive international response aimed at isolating Russia's technological acquisitions. Japan's decision signals a global consensus among Western allies to limit Russia's access to resources perceived as threats to international security. It also emphasizes the reach of US influence, even as India and other BRICS nations explore pathways to economic independence. The sanctions have brought renewed attention to BRICS as an influential coalition in counterbalancing Western economic dominance. As BRICS countries collaborate on creating alternative financial systems, including a proposed BRICS currency, they present a viable alternative to US-led economic structures. The growing cooperation between BRICS members indicates an effort to create a multipolar world where the economic and political influence is not solely determined by the West. India, China, and Russia have accelerated initiatives to reduce dollar dependency, signaling a move toward creating autonomous financial frameworks. BRICS countries are engaging in collaborative initiatives to diversify their trade practices, including establishing an alternative to SWIFT, the US-dominated payment system, to facilitate cross-border transactions independent of the US financial system. Each BRICS country has shown interest in conducting trade in local currencies, diminishing their reliance on the dollar. Discussions around a BRICS currency highlight the coalition's desire to challenge the dollar's dominance as the global reserve currency, providing economic sovereignty to member nations. BRICS represents a paradigm shift, challenging the once unshakable financial and political dominance of Western powers. The coalition has gained momentum, as more nations view it as a potential counterweight to Western economic influence. The current sanctions on Indian companies reveal the tensions between traditional Western control and the emergence of a new, more equitable economic landscape. BRICS provides an alternative to Western-centric economic systems, attracting countries that seek economic independence from Western policies. As BRICS strengthens, its member countries gain greater leverage in negotiating their economic relationships, often bypassing Western constraints. The rise of BRICS marks a shift toward a multipolar world where regional powers play an increasingly central role in shaping global policies and alliances. The road ahead: US sanctions, political change, and future dynamics. With the upcoming US elections, speculations abound regarding potential shifts in American foreign policy. Sanctions are a product of broader geopolitical agendas, often reflecting the prevailing administration's stance on global alliances and security. As such, changes in US leadership could profoundly impact its approach to sanctions, especially concerning strategic partners like India. Potential shifts under a new US administration. A change in US leadership might bring a recalibration of sanctions, especially if economic and diplomatic benefits outweigh the intent to penalize entities trading with Russia. Although there's no certainty about the policy shifts a new administration might bring, several factors suggest that the tone of sanctions could be re-evaluated. 1. Economic pragmatism. Sanctions that disrupt economic ties with strategic allies might be softened to prioritize mutual interests, especially with India's expanding economic clout. 2. Focus on strategic containment. A new administration might focus on more narrowly targeted sanctions aimed directly at critical Russian industries rather than broadly affecting international allies. 3. Potential for dialogue-based policy. An administration shift could open up channels for negotiation, allowing India to demonstrate its commitment to international security while maintaining its sovereign economic policies. A new US administration could recognize that punitive sanctions may not yield the desired results when applied to countries with rapidly growing economies and international leverage, like India. Instead, diplomatic engagement could become a more attractive and pragmatic approach, enabling the US to maintain influence without risking a drift toward BRICS alliances. Long-term implications for Indian companies. Indian companies, having demonstrated resilience in adapting to current sanctions, might continue to prioritize alternative markets and payment mechanisms, a trend that could outlast temporary sanctions relief. This adaptive strategy not only fortifies them against future economic pressures, but also sets a precedent for other nations navigating similar geopolitical landscapes. Key aspects of this long-term resilience include expanding global partnerships. Indian firms are likely to strengthen their relationships with non-Western nations, further diversifying their trade portfolios. Investment in indigenous technology and manufacturing. By reducing dependence on foreign goods, Indian companies are driving innovation within their borders, boosting national technological capabilities. Leading by example. India's resilience is setting a model for other developing nations that seek to maintain autonomy in global markets without succumbing to external pressures. As Indian companies navigate these sanctions, they are not only preserving their businesses but also fostering a robust model of economic sovereignty. This stance signals India's evolving role in a world where trade dynamics are no longer dictated by the hegemony of one economic bloc. The changing world order. How BRICS nations are redefining global power dynamics. The resilience of Indian companies against sanctions and the economic strategies employed by BRICS countries point toward an undeniable shift in global power. Once dominated by Western nations, particularly the US, the world is gradually moving toward a multipolar structure, where BRICS nations are emerging as counterweights to Western influence. The rise of BRICS as a global power bloc. The BRICS coalition, with its collective economic might, represents a significant challenge to the West's economic monopoly. Together, BRICS countries account for nearly 40% of the global population and a substantial share of the world's GDP, positioning them as influential players in the global economy. Recent trends indicate that BRICS is not only expanding in economic influence, but also evolving as a cohesive political and strategic bloc. Highlights of BRICS' growing influence include expansion of BRICS membership. Several countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America have expressed interest in joining BRICS, signaling the bloc's appeal as a counterbalance to Western-led organizations like NATO and the G7. Development of a BRICS bank. The new Development Bank, NDB, established by BRICS, provides an alternative to the World Bank and IMF, institutions traditionally dominated by Western countries. Promotion of local currencies in trade. By conducting trade in their local currencies, BRICS nations are reducing their dependency on the US dollar, which has historically been a tool for Western economic influence. Challenging the dollar's dominance. Perhaps the most significant shift in global economic dynamics is the concerted effort by BRICS nations to minimize their reliance on the US dollar. The dollar has been the world's primary reserve currency, affording the US significant power over international finance. However, recent actions by BRICS, including the proposal for a common currency, signal an intent to challenge this status quo. If successful, this shift could lead to 1. A reduced US financial influence. A drop in the global demand for dollars would weaken the US's ability to enforce economic sanctions and other financial policies internationally. 2. Strengthening of regional economies. By conducting transactions in local currencies, BRICS countries retain greater control over their economies, reducing vulnerability to global market fluctuations. 3. A new financial ecosystem. As BRICS continues to explore alternatives to the dollar, other regions may adopt similar strategies, potentially leading to a diversified global reserve system with multiple strong currencies. These steps represent a transformative shift toward a multipolar financial landscape, where no single country holds excessive economic control. This realignment is particularly significant in a world where emerging markets and developing economies seek to escape the limitations imposed by Western financial systems. A new era of geopolitics, the role of economic sovereignty. The sanctions on Indian companies underscore the broader theme of economic sovereignty, where nations prioritize self-reliance over dependence on Western economic models. For India and other BRICS countries, this pursuit of economic sovereignty reflects a larger trend toward reshaping the global order. In recent years, BRICS nations have made significant strides in asserting their independence, underscoring the principle that economic and political autonomy are essential for sustainable growth. India's growing assertiveness. India's assertive stance reflects its readiness to pursue its national interests without being constrained by Western expectations. This is evident in its handling of US sanctions, its rupee-centric trade practices, and its alignment with BRICS economic initiatives. India's strategy is not unique. Rather, it is part of a global movement among emerging powers to prioritize their economic and political sovereignty. Key aspects of India's assertiveness. Commitment to self-reliance. India's Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India. Initiative encourages domestic production and technology development, reducing dependency on foreign imports. Diversification of trade partners. India's increasing trade with Asian, African, and Latin American countries allows it to bypass Western economic pressures. Focus on indigenous innovation. By investing in local industries and technologies, India reduces its vulnerability to external shocks and enhances its bargaining power. This emphasis on economic sovereignty empowers India to participate in global markets on its terms, aligning with BRICS' mission to foster a balanced, multipolar world. The sanctions are thus a pivotal moment in India's journey toward realizing its vision of self-reliance and influence on the global stage. Conclusion: a transformative moment in global trade dynamics. The sanctions imposed by the U.S. on 19 Indian companies highlight a critical juncture in global trade and geopolitical relations. As Indian companies adapt and demonstrate resilience, the world witnesses the emergence of a new order where economic independence and multipolar alliances challenge traditional Western dominance. The rise of BRICS and India's strategic responses indicate a growing trend toward economic self-reliance and diversification. This movement signifies more than just resistance to sanctions. It reflects a reimagining of the global economy, where emerging powers are determined to define their pathways. For Indian companies, the sanctions serve as a learning curve, pushing them to develop independent trade mechanisms, forge new partnerships, and promote indigenous innovation. In the face of these sanctions, Indian companies and the BRICS coalition exemplify resilience, adaptability, and the spirit of economic sovereignty. They reveal a new era where international trade and finance are no longer monopolized by a single power, but shaped by diverse voices advocating for equality, autonomy, and shared prosperity. The world stands at a historic turning point, where the balance of power is steadily shifting toward a more decentralized and multipolar structure. As India and other BRICS nations continue to assert their presence, the global trade landscape is bound to witness revolutionary changes, paving the way for a future where economic sovereignty reigns supreme and geopolitical influence is truly diversified. In this evolving scenario, the sanctions imposed on Indian entities are not a deterrent, but a catalyst, driving India and its allies to chart a new autonomous course in the global arena.